Welcome to the Rogue Startups Podcast, where two startup founders are sharing lessons learned and pitfalls to avoid in their online businesses. And now, here's Dave and Craig.
All right, welcome to episode 248 of Rogue Startups. Craig, how are you this week?
I am good, man. Good. Back home in France after 4 weeks in the US. So nice to be home at my desk with my big old monitor and, like proper place to work after kind of just figuring it out from a work perspective and schedule for a few weeks. But it was really nice. It was really nice to be there on the same schedule as about half the team. So we have about half the team here and half the team in the US. So it was really nice to be on that schedule for a little bit to get to connect with a lot of them more regularly. So, but yeah, always nice to be home.
Very nice, very nice. Not to mention the fact that you are 2 doses of the vaccine stronger at this point, and you're one of you're one of like 7 people in France now that has the vaccine, right?
That's about right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's getting better. They're picking up steam here, but I mean, they're just so far behind. The US and the UK in terms of percentage of eligible people, to be vaccinated. So it's challenging, man. I mean, I don't, the challenging thing is it doesn't get me anything tangible to be vaccinated today, but I think we're hoping that in the future we'll be able to travel more because we're vaccinated. They're talking about today, actually, this kind of green certificate or something where if you're vaccinated, you can travel Europe more freely. And if you're not, then you can't, coming up this summer. So those kinds of things that being vaccinated here in Europe gets you certain liberties, I guess, that non-vaccinated folks can't. So definitely glad we did it. It was horrible though, man. I mean, it kicked me right in the head for 2 days. And I had Pfizer. After I get that second shot, about 15 hours after that, I was just totally cashed out for about 24 hours. It was terrible.
Yeah, I had the same thing with my Moderna second shot. Fever, chills, aches, 24 hours and done. But it was a miserable 24 hours for me. Yeah. But yeah. I'm glad it's over. And, we've got my wife and I are now 2 doses in. My oldest daughter is 1 dose in. They just look like they're on the verge of approving the 12 to 15. So that means my 13-year-old will be eligible here pretty soon. And my youngest turns 12 in August. So, I mean, yes, there is a window here, and I'm looking forward to it opening up in the very near future.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. How about you? How are things?
Things are good. Yeah. So trying to put together my own content marketing stuff right now. And I've got a keyword research plan in flight, and I'm trying to deal with the writer piece of it at the moment. And then once I've got those 2 in place, then I need to find somebody to do some link building for me. So yeah, just trying to search all those pieces and put it all together and make it work in a relatively good time frame. I mean, I'm so far behind where I should have been at this point, and I feel like, I'm missing that opportunity, but I'm not really missing the opportunity. It's just, it feels like that. So, and then we are trying to push the SMS stuff out the door, and I think I finally decided on what the pricing looks like on that. But that also falls in my court at the moment to try to get that last bit done and handed to my developer so he can code that. And I keep meaning to do it, and I haven't gotten to it yet. So, blah.
So
that's where I'm at.
Are you able to share it, or are we all going to be suspended in waiting here?
Share the pricing?
Share what the pricing model is like.
So I've ultimately decided that because I don't know how many people are going to sign up for this, and trying to revamp all of the pricing around this seems kind of crazy at this point, what I'm doing is I'm going to make them both add-ons, just strict add-ons right now, which when I revisited it and thought about it and talked about it with a lot of people, it seemed like that ended up being the simplest consideration. So if we basically view Recapture as, hey, we do abandoned carts, and somebody signs up for us and they're like, okay, you do abandoned carts, great. And they like what we do with abandoned carts. Then the way that it typically comes after that is that, oh, hey, do you also do broadcast emails? So it's can we put this all under one roof kind of consideration, as opposed to I'm looking for the platform that does everything. Somebody isn't searching for that up front for me so far. That's not what I've heard from customers. That's what I wanted to believe, but that's not what the data is telling me at this point. So my current plan is to basically say, we're going to say, all right, here's our basic pricing for the abandoned cart stuff. And, most people, I think that works pretty well. And then if they want to upgrade and they want to add on SMS, then they can add on SMS as a separate price. And then we're going to do the same thing with broadcast emails. If you want to add this too, great, we can do that. Because for them, it's more of a convenience factor. They don't want to, they like our platform for the abandoned carts, and they've got their broadcast somewhere else, and they're, the things that I've heard are, well, we just don't like it over there, or we don't like the analytics, we don't like something about it, and we just want it all under one roof. We want it all consistent.
Yep.
And so if I offer that a la carte kind of thing, then they can get that consistency, and I can get the revenue from that, instead of me trying to say, all right, we're the platform that does everything, which doesn't, that's not what I'm hearing from the customers that I'm talking to about that. So it was important to kind of reframe that discussion. And I was having a hard time reframing that until somebody pointed that out. So I think that's where I ended up on this.
Nice. I like it. I mean, it definitely keeps with the simple that you wanted to stick with before, that like, hey, this is the headline, and kind of subtext, you can have these add-ons. Like, I think that makes like a lot of sense. Yeah. So that's cool. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, we'll see. I'll get it pushed out and hopefully it resonates.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you get a lot of traction with it, then, it's easy to go and say like, okay, we're going to bake this into the regular pricing somehow later if a bunch of people want to kind of opt into the add-on. So that's nice.
Right. And it may be later on that we do like the convenience bundle or something like that to say, here, you can get the whole kit and caboodle for one price.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So
nice.
that can be an evolutionary step, not a revolutionary one. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Nice. You were talking about content marketing. From our end, we did hire another writer. Yeah. I mean, and kind of just to highlight the process we went through, because I know we talked about it. We posted a job posting on We Work Remotely and on problogger.com job board. Got a whole bunch of applications. And really the biggest few things that I looked for were like for us, like domain expertise, like experience in podcasting, other places that people had written before, just because like, kind of like, hey, where have you worked before? Like that pedigree is like hopefully a good kind of signal of like a quality candidate. And then a pretty soft question about like, why do you want to write for Castos? But just to see what people have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Got a whole bunch of applications, picked about a dozen or 15 to respond to. Of those, a handful came back with, like really quality kind of responses, and then gave all of them a test project. And the test project was like, we doubled up on a single article across a couple of different writers. And yeah, from there, really got one that was like a standout. And so, yeah, brought her on. She wrote actually a guest post for us, which was cool, and going to bring her into the mix. So yeah, that was kind of the process. Pretty happy with what we got in the end, and are paying like what we want for a really good writer. Turns out our writer that we thought was going to leave is not leaving. So we have two writers now, which is cool. So we can kind of double up on content. And now, kind of like you're saying, have to figure out how to plan for that. Like, do we write twice a week now, or do we really push guest posting and have one of the writers pretty much just do guest posts or something like that? So I think that's where the bottleneck is with writers, is we have two writers that are ready to go, and we don't have two writers worth of stuff planned. So that's kind of where I'm the bottleneck in the process again.
Right. Yeah, we always end at the bottleneck at some point, right? So yeah. I have a couple of questions about your process. So you said you got a ton of applications. What was it that you looked for that sort of singled them out? Was it the why question, or was it the work samples? Was it a combination? Like, what was your filter criteria? Because usually there's something that can really filter out the wheat from the chaff, right?
Yeah, I think the first one was work samples. And as silly as it is, just look for like, hey, I've written for, this site or that site that I really know and respect. Like that's a great sign for me. The second was like the response to kind of my open-ended question, just to see like, hey, do they have interesting things to say? Are they kind of witty and clever? Or is it just like, I want a job, I need money. Yeah. So that's it. And then I wrote like my question to them was, more of like, what about this role specifically interests you? So that, like kind of why do you want to work with Castos? And kind of just wanted to see what they had to say. Do they get back to you in a timely manner? Are they professional over email? Does it seem like someone I can communicate with? Those kind of things.
Okay. And the test project, was it paid or not?
Yep, it was paid. It was a flat fee. And yeah, agreed on that pretty early in the conversation. Saying, hey, this is what we're looking for, this many words, this kind of rate. And it was around that like $300 to $400 per article range that we talked about before.
Right. So that's great. You found somebody that rose to the top through all of that right there. So that's excellent. And how many total applications did you end up getting to start with?
Like 200 something.
Oh, good
rather.
God.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I mean, it's totally unfair, like from our perspective to try to do 200 applicants justice, because you have 5 seconds to look at each one.
Right.
Right. So, and it's the same way, like when we hired for support, it was the same way, just so many applicants. And I'm sure there were a ton of gems that we missed, but, try to do the best we could.
Okay. All right. Well, that's cool. And I'm going to have to totally carp a lot of that from you here because I haven't made my job posting yet. So it sounds like that ended up in a fairly good place, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So I could basically do a search and replace in your job post from podcasting to e-commerce and be good.
Yeah, I mean the thing that that like we're always trying to refine is exactly that question you had, was like, how can we structure the application to where when a really good candidate comes through, it's easy to see, like how can we ask a question or, form the whole interviewing process to where like a really good applicant will rise to the top automatically and easily. And I don't feel like we nail that at all with how we hire. Like, I think it's just something that a lot of people struggle with, especially if you want to do it quickly, So I don't have my answers there, but that's the one thing I'll spend more time on as we go forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hiring is the hardest thing that all of us do as founders in general. And, as a hiring manager for developers for years, I've struggled through a variety of different kinds of questions to find what is the ideal way to screen a candidate, to keep the bozos out, to let the cream rise to the top, and somehow have your process stand out in their mind, like that they don't feel like you're just putting them on a grill with everybody else and treating them the same way. But the truth is you have so many of them to go through. You kind of have to have that sameness process to make it work. And, I remember as a developer manager, one of the first things that we did were those stupid brain teasers because Microsoft was doing them at the time. This was in the late 90s. And, it seemed like that was a good question, but, then we hired some people that were really good at the brain teaser and they were really shitty employees. And I was like, God damn it, this is not a good question. So then, I just tried general screening questions, but then that didn't really, I got mediocre employees out of some of those things there. Some good ones too, but it didn't like focus us on just the good candidates. So I didn't feel like that was a great way to do it either. And then later on, I found a very simple question that we use now. And if you're in the developer space, then you probably heard of the FizzBuzz test. And you're probably, there's probably half the audience that's now rolling their eyes thinking that I use this test. But surprisingly, this test, which is a basic, very simple, translate some English into software logic. And it seems on the surface like it's a dumb question and it's just so simple, like it shouldn't test anything. But what I've noticed that it does is that it helps me screen out the really good people. because the really good people can look at that question, realize that it is so dead simple. And, some of them will like seize up a little bit and then start asking me all kinds of edge cases. Should I be checking for this? Should I be checking for this? Should I be doing this? Should I be thinking about that? And those are the people, like, you want people that think like that. So that's a good sign right there. The other good sign is when somebody goes, all right, I think I understand this. Maybe they ask some questions, maybe they don't, but then they have the whole solution implemented in like 5 minutes. And that's what it's supposed to do. Like, if you are that good, it should let you come right out and just say, here's what the solution is. And then I've got a second level of that question where we ask them about some optimization ideas. So it lets me go deeper into their thinking on still a very dead simple problem and what on the surface looks really fucking stupid. But it turns out to actually have some really great screening capability to it. And good candidates breeze through it really quickly. Bad candidates struggle. Miserable candidates can't even do it. So
amazing.
It is the perfect question for that. It doesn't tell you much about like their personality, their communication. So I have to supplement it with some other things during the interview process to suss that stuff out. But as far as a screening question goes, I found that's really good. But I haven't found the equivalent for that with like customer support or, I've only tried to hire a writer a couple of times at this point, and I didn't have anything more than very basic stuff. And so, it's hard to find that same question in other domains. That's the thing. And I'm not even sure what that question looks like in other domains. How do you ask a writer how good they are? I mean, all I can think of is sample work, right? So you look at their sample work. It's either shit or it's not shit, right? And
some of it's, ghost written, so you can't really tell that it's them. Like they're not on the byline and a lot of those things. But I mean, I think the other part of that is like, probably like you're doing in software is like get to actually working together as quickly as possible, Right. And that's ultimately the only thing that ever really matters is what is the minimum amount of screening I can do to make sure that this person is minimally capable of doing the job. And then let's work with them for 30 to 90 days and see if they're a piece of shit or not. And if they are, then we kick them out the door. And if they aren't, then... That's a little harsh, Dave.
Well...
To see if they're not a good fit.
If they're not a good fit, yes. But sometimes I've hired people that have been like just absolutely miserable in the communication department. They sounded really good for the 1 week that I was interviewing them. And then they fell apart after I brought them on board. Like they ghosted me and they weren't talking about what they were struggling with and they weren't getting things done. And so, I mean, that's kind of shitty thing to do after you get hired.
Yep.
So, I mean, that goes beyond not a good fit. They're just like, they fell apart. And why did I not recognize that during the interview process? How did they sort of skirt my detectors? Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yeah, we've had that recently too. And it's challenging. You look back and say like, how did I miss this? What did I do wrong? And I think that's why hiring is so challenging, because you're not doing anything wrong. It's just that figuring all that out from, an hour or 2 hours of talking to someone is just challenging. And I think that's just why it's so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing
making excuses.
The only thing that really seems to work is just that trial period and say, look, at any time we can call it off, either of us. And we'll work it out, and at the end we'll make a decision. But the hard part is at the end of that, if they're sort of like middling, that's the part that I struggle with. Like, should I keep them on or should I let them go? They kind of did okay, but they're not doing as great as I had hoped. Yeah. Anyway, all right. So we're kind of off track there. But yes.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing I thought might be interesting just to kind of talk through, and again, I think neither of us are experts or have the answers to this, but just interesting to talk about maybe is, the question of whether a company is an LLC or a C-corp. I think there's a lot of tendency, maybe bias in our kind of, bootstrapper space around one versus the other. And I think very real like upsides of both. And I guess the context of this is that Castos started out as an LLC and joined Tiny Seed as an LLC, which I think they're one of the few kind of accelerators, investment places that you can join as an LLC. But just as of this week, converted to a C-corp because it gives us some more flexibility in terms of our options down the line around financing and corporate structure and things like that. So, I just thought we'd talk through this. I know like Einar from Tiny Seed and has been on Startups with the rest of us a few times, knows a ton about this. Maybe you should have him on as a guest, but I think like he's talked about this quite a bit. And maybe we'll try to do some of that knowledge justice here.
Yeah, Einar's the top guy on this that I know of, and it wasn't really until Josh at Baremetrics went through the QSBS with his C-corp when he sold Baremetrics that everybody was like, oh, I could do that. And so let's give a little bit of background for somebody who might be sitting here scratching their head and doesn't know what all of this stuff means and what the implications are here. So LLC is definitely one of the the simplest option is a sole proprietorship. And clearly a lot of people start out, if you're a bootstrapper or single founder, you're probably going to think about maybe a sole proprietorship. At some point, if you talk to a CPA, if you talk to a lawyer, they'll probably, say blah, 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 liability shield, blah, 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 be careful of lawsuits, blah, blah, blah. You should form an LLC. And the LLC gives you some corporate liability protection. It doesn't, if you do something personally stupid, you're still going to be liable for that. But in general, there is a level of liability protection that you get as an LLC. And so, there's a natural upgrade, I think, or a place to start where an LLC is kind of like one of the simplest corporate entities that you can have out there. And then there's S-corps and C-corps, and C-corps are the ones that, you think of that are the more traditional, larger corporations. They tend to issue stock. They have shareholders. They have dividends that they publish out, but then they are also taxed as a corporate entity, whereas LLCs, S-corps, and sole proprietorships are what they call pass-through. So if they make a certain amount of income, that corporate entity doesn't get taxed, and it passes down to you as the owner or one of the owners of that business, and it goes on your personal taxes. So, that's one of the big things I think that detracts most people, myself included, from looking at the C-corp is that there's a problem of double taxation that comes with that. So you're taxed as the C-corp on your profits or your entities right there. And then you're also taxed as a personal owner of that business on the income you make on it. Whereas with a pass-through entity, it's single taxation. So it's only on your personal taxes that you get hit with that. But
I think the big caveat for me there is if you are profitable.
If you're profitable, yes. I mean,
and so I think that a lot of, us, frankly, start out as C-corps because we say, okay, I can pay myself, fair market wage in terms of salary, and then I can take dividends, and those are taxed as long-term capital gains, I guess, right? As an LLC. If you do that as a C-corp, then the company is taxed on its corporate profit and you're taxed on everything that's not salary personally. And so that's where the double taxation comes in, is if you're, a mega profitable company or profitable at all, and you take a bunch of money home, both of those could be taxed.
Right. And so let me just put a huge fucking asterisk on this whole discussion. Do not take Craig and I for solid, realistic, helpful tax advice. Some of this is born out of our own experiences with our own CPAs and our own situations in our own states. If you need real advice and real help on this, please find a CPA in your province, state, locality, wherever, and somebody who can actually give you real legal advice about the exact situations and problems that you're facing. Your mileage may vary, tax title and license extra, all of that sort of stuff. Yes, it's the fine print, but
yeah. So, I think that on the surface, the benefits of a C-corp don't seem so obvious, but Dave, like you mentioned, Josh with Baremetrics had sold as a C-corp, and there's this thing called QSBS, qualified something,
small business shares or something.
Qualified small business shares. There you go. Yeah. So there's this thing called qualified small business shares, QSBS, where if you are a C-corp and you hold the shares for more than 5 years, upon the sale of those shares, you are not taxed.
You are not
And
taxed
so
long-term capital gains. I don't think it's like completely tax-free in any way, shape, or form, right?
Got it.
Yeah.
So this is the edge of my knowledge around it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you don't get the long-term capital gains on there, but there might be some other taxes. Like if it bumps you into a higher income tax bracket, you might get taxed on that. I don't know exactly how that works. This is where we need Einar on here because Einar would know this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There are also some situations, and again, I don't know the answer, where you can leave money in the corporation. And again, this is a whole nother one, is if you go to sell your company and you sell it as an asset sale versus a stock sale. If you sell it as a stock sale, then the acquirer is actually purchasing your company, not just your software and your IP and your customer list and stuff like that, which would be an asset sale. And there is an instance, and I don't know the details of it, where if you sell your company as an asset, you can keep the money in the corporation under certain circumstances. And I believe that can be tax deferred or tax free or something like that, which, if you think about, like, none of us are going to retire, so we're probably going to go do something else. There is a time where you could say, okay, I'm going to sell for whatever. So you sell for $1 million. If some of these criteria are met, you can just say, hey, I'm going to keep, some amount of that in the company and go do something else with it. Instead of having to bring it home and pay income tax on it.
Right.
So that's just another thing to investigate further. Again, we are not tax people, but these are just kind of ideas and thoughts.
Yeah. And so in Josh's case, it worked out really well because it sounded like he basically had a number of expenses that the business was paying. So his corporate profit was not zero, but it wasn't huge either. It wasn't like 50% of his income or 25% of his income. It was okay, but it wasn't like that high. So he was basically getting taxed on we'll call it a reasonable level of profit. And he had that for 5 years, but everything else was going into the business. And he was getting a decent salary out of that. So he wasn't unhappy with that setup either. But then when he got to the sale of the business, the taxes that he'd been paying on there were much, much less than the taxes he would have paid at the sale event for, I forget what the sales price of Barometrics was, but it was big.
It's like $4.5 million.
Yeah, I was going to say it's close to 5. So, when Josh basically ended up with his money, I think he was showing that if he had done this the traditional C-corp route, then he would have been left with 2.1, and instead he walked away with 4. Something like that, or maybe 3.5. But it was a significant difference. Like, it made a huge difference in taxes. So, in that particular case, if you could somehow run the numbers, predict the future, and assume, hey, this is going to work, then I would say that C-corp route makes a lot of sense. But, that 5-year vesting period, that's the struggle. And, if you do suddenly get cash flow heavy, and I can think of several businesses, several friends of ours that are in very cash flow heavy businesses, where I think they would be paying a shit ton in taxes if they were doing this right now, because I don't think they've deployed their capital in a way that they could take advantage of all of that and make expenses happen out of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it is very much a situational dependent kind of thing.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I think the other thing that I kind of touched on at the beginning is, we did it partly or maybe mostly just for options in the future around different kinds of, fundraising, raising debt, raising equity, raising money from equity, that, it's just, a C-corp, and the shares that are associated with it are just kind of the language that a lot of investors talk. And so I think that's the other consideration, is like, if this is a business that you're not expecting to raise money from, then you don't need to be a C-corp. If you are planning to raise money, again, like even a lot of debt, I think companies or, lenders want, it to be a C-corp. For us in particular, there is a usury law in Florida that restricts debt lenders from issuing like significant amount of debt if they're an out-of-state lender. So it might be specific to Florida. And again, your mileage may vary, but that was one thing we ran into, is that we just couldn't take on a sizable loan with most lenders. So it was weird.
Yeah. And from what I've seen on contracts, so when I sold the plugins, the company that bought them, they were based out of Florida. And they had some weird language that was in the contract that I was like, does this need to be in here? Because it didn't make any sense to me. And I took it to my lawyer and they're like, I've never even heard of that. And they were like, oh, that's a Florida thing. But yeah, you don't need to worry about that. And I was like, okay, strike it from the contract.
It's a Florida thing. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, so Florida's got some weird company purchase laws in there. So that wouldn't surprise me that there's stuff around funding as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's another thing is, right, like a Delaware C corporation is the most standard thing that everyone will understand, whether it's fundraising or debt or buying or selling. That is like the baseline, that I think a lot of people, attorneys, bankers, whatever, are used to speaking.
Right. And if that's the way you want to go, then you should be speaking the language of those people that you are going to be talking to. So yeah, don't make it complicated. Although I've heard that if you, have a non-C entity and you decide you want to start raising, then one of the first things they ask you to do, and I've heard this in Y Combinator, they make you turn it into a C-corp so you can issue shares, and then they structure it according to the deal and so on and so forth. So it's, if you're doing that, it's usually the first step in the process is to make a C-corp so that you can actually issue the shares and have the ownership split be according to whatever that fundraising event is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a tax thing for the investors a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but I think that's a tax thing for investors is investing in an LLC gives them different kind of tax exposure than in a corporation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we should definitely have Einar on here to talk the specifics and the details around that, because it can definitely, it's something. I have an S-corp right now, and it's something that is sort of sitting in the back of my mind. If Recapture gets big and I decide, hey, I'm done with this and I want to sell, now I have to go through the same thing I just did with the plugins, and I got to pay a shit ton of taxes, which I did, and not my favorite event. It also, there was a little bit of a surprise in that the sale bumped up my income, and so all of a sudden I passed some thresholds temporarily that I wouldn't normally have passed, and so I lost deductions doing so.
Sure. Yep.
And so I ended up paying more taxes. I was like, wow. I mean, that's definitely a surprise. And, my CPA had warned me, like, you're going to, there's no avoiding this. You have to do something. And congratulations, you sold your business. But yes, you owe some taxes, and it's going to hurt a little bit. He wasn't wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a good problem to have. You just want to minimize how much of a problem it is, right? Like,
yes.
Making a bunch of money, selling your business, having this big tax thing is, you should be overall happy that you're in that spot, but just, want to pay as little tax as you reasonably can.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Responsibly. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Well, Dave, I feel like we had a lot more questions than answers and anything in this episode, but it's an interesting thing to talk about. I think the one kind of question mark out there too is there's proposals out there from Biden about changes in tax structure. Of course, none of us know what that will actually look like, but I think some of that may affect the advantages of an LLC down the line. So kind of just something else to be on the lookout for us all.
Yep. And if you're enjoying the podcast, our one ask, as always, is to share us with a friend who you think would benefit. And if you have a minute, please reach out to iTunes, give us a review there. We'd love to hear from you. Until next week.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Rogue Startups. If you haven't already, head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the show. For show notes from each episode and a few extra resources to help you along your journey, head over to roguestartups.com to learn more.